April 18, 1942, North Pacific Ocean. The deck of USS Hornet heaves under the weight of rising swells as gray water slams against the bow. Wind claws across the flight deck, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of fuel, salt, and metal. Overhead clouds hang low and swollen, pressing down on the carrier like a lid. Every man on deck feels the vibration of the engines below, the deep mechanical heartbeat of a ship pushing hard into an unforgiving sea. Corporal Leland Factor tightens the strap of his life vest as a sheet of spray breaks over the starboard side. His gloves are already damp. Ahead of him, a line of B-25 Mitchell bombers sits packed wing to wing, each one chained to the deck and pointing at the narrow flight path that lies only a few dozen yards long. The twin engines of the lead aircraft sputter to life, coughing smoke before settling into a steady growl. The sound rolls across the deck like distant thunder. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle walks with his head slightly bowed against the wind, his flight jacket snapping with every gust. He does not need to raise his voice when he passes his crew. A simple nod is enough. They know the odds. Medium bombers were never built to leave a carrier deck. Their wingspan is too broad, their weight too heavy, their requirements for takeoff length far beyond what the Hornet can give. Yet here they stand, staring down a takeoff run no larger than a city street. Over the ship's loudspeakers, a clipped voice announces the worst news possible. A Japanese picket boat has been sighted astern. Moments later comes the confirmation. The Hornet's escorts have sunk it, but not before it radioed their presence. The mission has been compromised, and Doolittle knows they must launch now or turn back. His decision is immediate. Launch the strike. A tremor of urgency ripples across the flight deck. Deck handlers in cranial helmets sprint to remove tie-down chains. Ordnance men double-check the bombs secured beneath the bellies of the Mitchells. Navigator Lieutenant Henry Potter climbs into his aircraft, sliding into the cramped compartment behind the cockpit. His fingers press against cold aluminum as he settles in. He hears the muffled thud of waves slamming against the hull below, a reminder of how little room for error remains. Inside the lead aircraft, pilot Lieutenant Richard Cole grips the control yoke and glances at his co-pilot. Neither speaks. The cabin smells of oil and canvas. The engines roar as he advances the throttle for a run-up, and the Mitchell trembles violently, straining against the wheel chocks. A green flag waves outside the cockpit window, rippling hard in the wind. The Hornet begins a slow turn, angling into the wind to give the bombers every advantage. The sea grows rougher as the ship leans into the gusts, whitecaps forming just beyond the bow. Each time the deck rises, the nose of the Mitchell lifts with it, as if urging the aircraft onward. Doolittle climbs into his own aircraft several positions, back. He adjusts his headset, listening to the scratch of radio static as his crew performs final checks. Fuel, flaps, trim, bomb fuses, every step done with quiet precision. He glances out the small window to the forward deck where the first Mitchell prepares to move. The sight is unreal, even to him, a bomber. A full-sized Army bomber, about to launch from a carrier in the middle of the Pacific. A final gust sweeps across the deck, rattling helmets and pushing loose fabric flat against bodies. Then the wheel chocks are pulled. The ground crewman signals with sweeping arms. Engines roar to maximum power. The Mitchell lurches forward. As the aircraft begins its run, the deck seems to shrink beneath it, the short runway ending in open ocean. Spray flies upward as the bow lifts again. The bomber races toward it, engines screaming, radial pistons hammering so hard the fuselage trembles from nose to tail. Every man watching holds his breath. The Mitchell reaches the edge. For a heartbeat, it seems to hang there, suspended above the boiling sea. Then its nose tips up slightly, catching the wind, and the aircraft climbs. The bomber climbs, its wings shuddering as the turbulent air coming off the bow slams against the fuselage. Lieutenant Richard Cole keeps his hands tight on the yoke, easing the nose upward inch by inch. Below him, the Pacific stretches like a field of hammered steel, dark and restless. The B-25 fights for altitude, its engines straining under the load of fuel and bombs. Only once the altimeter needle ticks past 200 feet does Cole allow himself a breath. Behind the departing aircraft, the next Mitchell begins to crawl forward. One after another, the engines of the remaining bombers roar in defiance of the sea that claws at the sides of the carrier. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle's aircraft is several spots back, and the men inside listen to the tremor of each takeoff. Every successful lift strengthens their resolve, but no one speaks. Even the hum of the intercom feels intrusive, as if words might break the fragile balance keeping this mission alive. Doolittle watches through the narrow cockpit window as another bomber races ahead. The deck beneath it rises with a swell, giving the aircraft a momentary gift of lift. Its tires leave the timber planking, and it surges into open air. The wind carries it upward, small at first, then climbing steadily as it joins the faint silhouette of the lead aircraft disappearing into the haze. Then, at last, Doolittle's turn comes. His engines thunder as he advances the throttles. The bomber begins to move. The ship's crew, soaked by spray and sweat, sprint alongside to clear the path. The smell of exhaust fills the cockpit, mixing with the faint scent of rubber and cordite. Doolittle's eyes remain fixed on the far end of the deck. He can feel his crew behind him. Lieutenant Paul Leonard as co-pilot. Lieutenant Harry McCool as navigator. Sergeant Fred Bramer at his gun position. Sergeant Paul Warren monitoring the bombs, all of them silent, steady, and waiting. When the nose climbs free of the deck, Doolittle levels off just above the surface, letting the wind and speed carry him forward. Only once the aircraft settles into smooth airflow does he pull the throttles back slightly. The Mitchell holds steady. Behind him, the final aircraft roars into the sky, completing a launch once considered impossible. Soon, all 16 Mitchells form a rough trail across the vast Pacific, each flying low to conserve fuel. The sea lies only a few hundred feet below their hulls. Flying this low keeps them hidden from Japanese radar, but it also leaves little margin for mechanical failure. The men can see the white foam break over distant swells. Occasionally, the shadow of a bomber skims the water's surface, a fleeting reflection of aluminum and determination. Navigator Lieutenant Henry Potter studies his maps, the thin paper rustling each time the aircraft hits a pocket of rough air. He uses a combination of compass headings, speed estimates, and dead reckoning to guide the aircraft westward. Clouds shift and break overhead, letting narrow rays of light strike the ocean. The world feels both immense and claustrophobic, every minute measured by fuel burn and engine temperature. Radio silence remains absolute. The only voices are within the aircraft. Pilots call out airspeed and engine readings. Navigators mark position changes. Gunners scan the horizon for Japanese patrol craft or fighters. Each man knows that if they are intercepted now, their chances are grim. The B-25 is strong and well-armed, but far from invincible. Hours pass. The aircraft vibrates with the steady rhythm of its twin Wright R-2600 engines. Their low, throaty droning becomes a constant presence, a physical sensation in the chest. The crew eats small rations in silence, passing the time with calculations, checks, and quiet thoughts none dare to speak. Eventually, the faintest trace of coastline appears on the horizon. Potter leans forward, squinting through the navigation window. Land. The outline sharpens, a sweep of cliffs, a thin line of beach, then the hazy rise of hills behind it. The crew feels an electric jolt run through the cabin. This is Japan, the home islands, the place they were told no American bomber could ever reach. Doolittle adjusts his heading, flying parallel to the coast to maintain the lowest possible altitude. A fishing vessel appears below them, its crew shielding their eyes as the bomber passes overhead. No radio flashes upward, no gunfire, only stunned faces watching the impossible glide by. Further along the coastline, smoke rises from small industrial towns. Rail lines snake inland. Roads cut across fields of early crops. The crew studies every detail. The reality of their target makes the mission suddenly sharper, more personal. The aircraft banks slightly. Tokyo lies ahead, a web of rivers, bridges, factories, and military installations. The most guarded heart of the empire. Doolittle tightens his grip on the yoke as the city's outer districts come into view. The time for stealth is ending. The attack is moments away. Tokyo spreads beneath them, a vast sprawl of factories, warehouses, rail yards, and tightly packed neighborhoods. Smokestacks rise like blackened pillars against the gray sky. The early afternoon haze hangs low over the city, making the horizon pulse with a faint metallic shimmer. Doolittle lowers the nose slightly, bringing the B-25 to attack altitude. The engines deepen to a steady growl that vibrates through every rib of the aircraft. Inside the cabin, the crew braces. Sergeant Fred Bramer adjusts the bomb sight, his gloved fingers settling over the cold metal frame. The thin glass of the nose blister reveals the world rushing toward them. He can see workers moving between buildings, unaware of what is coming. A line of rail cars sits frozen on a track, steam venting from beneath their wheels. A column of trucks moves along a road that cuts through an industrial district. The bomber's shadow flickers across rooftops. Doolittle calls out their heading. His voice is calm, low, and steady. The city seems to rise up to meet them as they cross from the suburbs into the dense industrial quarter. The smell of hot oil and exhaust seeps into the cabin through the ventilation ducts, mixed with the faint scent of explosives ready in the bomb bay. Below them, flak positions begin to stir. A few seconds later, the first shells erupt. Sharp black bursts scatter across the sky, leaving trails of bitter smoke that whip past the cockpit windows. The aircraft jostles as fragments pepper the air. Sergeant Bramer steadies himself, focusing on the bomb sight as if nothing else exists. Each breath fogs slightly inside his mask. The bomber presses deeper into the city. More flak bursts overhead, closer now. A fragment pings against the fuselage with a sound like a small hammer striking steel. Doolittle holds the line, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The ground below is alive with motion. Troops run from barracks toward firing positions. Civilians scatter into alleys and doorways. The city has realized what is happening. A formation of Japanese fighters scrambles from an airfield on the far side of the city. But they are too late to reach the bombers before the strike. Only a single interceptor cuts across the skyline, banking sharply as it climbs to intercept. Its engine wails as it rises, the sun catching its wings. But the B-25s are too low and too fast. The fighter overshoots and vanishes behind a plume of smoke from a factory chimney. Doolittle gives the order. Bramer grips the release handle. Through the bomb sight, he sees the target. A sprawling military warehouse complex, rows of long buildings broken by narrow courtyards. Workers sprint for cover. Vehicles jam the streets leading away from the compound. The bomber steadies. Bombs away. The release jolts the aircraft with a sudden upward lift, The bombs tumble cleanly from the bay, small and dark against the gray backdrop of rooftops and rails. A heartbeat passes. Then the first explosion rises in a flash of fire and dust. Another blast erupts beside it, sending debris upward in a swirling plume. Smoke boils across the yard as flames lick at the edges of the buildings. Doolittle pulls the aircraft into a climb, banking hard to the east. More flak blossoms around them, chaotic and poorly aimed. The Japanese gunners had never imagined enemy bombers reaching their capital. Their response is frantic, rushed. Shell bursts flare too high or too far behind, giving the Mitchells precious seconds to escape. Behind Doolittle's aircraft, other bombers make their runs. Each strikes a different target: steel factories, oil storage tanks, machine works, and military arsenals. Fire rises in thin columns across the outskirts of the city. The damage is not catastrophic, but the shock is monumental. Tokyo is burning from American bombs delivered by bombers that were never supposed to take off from a carrier. The skyline begins to drop behind them as Doolittle brings his aircraft low again, racing out of Tokyo's airspace. Smoke trails along the wings, carried by the wind. Sergeant McCool checks their position against the map. Ahead lies the long, uncertain leg toward China. No American airfield awaits them. Fuel is running leaner by the minute. The last of the B-25s clears the industrial district. Tokyo, still stunned, recedes into a haze of smoke, alarm sirens, and confusion. For the first time since the mission began, the city's defenders grasp a truth they never believed possible. The home islands are not beyond reach. Ahead of the bombers, the sky darkens. Weather is building over the sea. The darkening sky stretches ahead like a warning. Heavy clouds stack over the horizon, layered and thick, turning the world into a narrowing tunnel of gray. Doolittle steadies the B-25 at low altitude, keeping beneath the storm ceiling. His crew remains silent except for the occasional status call. The adrenaline from the bombing run lingers, but the reality of the return flight settles in quickly. They have left Japan behind, but safety is still thousands of miles away. The Pacific wind pushes against the aircraft's nose, rough and unrelenting. Fuel gauges tremble with every vibration. Navigator Lieutenant Harry McCool traces their heading with a pencil, marking rough estimates. He knows the truth even before he speaks it. Their early launch cost them precious miles of range. The storm forming ahead will make accurate navigation nearly impossible. Yet he keeps calculating, makeshift methods drawn from training and instinct. Far behind them, the last thin outline of Japan fades into the haze. The coastline disappears first, then the rising hills. Then finally, the faint shimmer of industrial smoke they left burning. Now the sea stretches open and empty once more. The B-25s level out in loose formation, though each aircraft flies at its own endurance, engines humming with fatigue. Sergeant Paul Warren checks the bomb bay, now empty and rattling with the slight looseness that comes after a drop. He pushes aside dangling straps and braces himself against the jolting floor. The storm ahead has begun to churn the air. Every few seconds the bomber lurches, rising sharply, then dropping with a stomach-turning thud. Loose equipment rattles. The cabin lights flicker. Rain appears ahead as a curtain, thick and steady. The first drops slap against the canopy with a metallic crackle. In seconds, the world becomes a blur of streaked water and cloud. Doolittle squints through the windshield, adjusting his heading slightly to compensate for crosswinds. The altimeter jumps erratically as the storm's downdrafts hit them. Radio silence remains in place, but each crew senses the growing isolation. The storm swallows sound, vision, and any sense of direction. Doolittle's aircraft bucks wildly as a gust slams into the left wing, pushing it down. He counters with a firm pull on the yoke. The engines groan, rattling hard enough to vibrate through their boots. Navigator McCool leans close to his faintly glowing map. He draws another line, calculates drift, and shakes his head. He cannot guarantee their exact position anymore. The cloud ceiling is too low, the sea invisible beneath them. But he gives the best heading he can, east by southeast, toward China. Hours stretch on. Fuel ticks down relentlessly. Crewmen shift to manage weight balance. But even small adjustments feel futile. They all know the truth. None of the Mitchells will reach the airfields they were supposed to land at. The early launch sealed that fate. Now the only hope is to find the Chinese coast before fuel runs dry. Lightning flashes somewhere inside the storm, bright enough to silhouette the wings for a heartbeat. The thunder follows as a deep, distant rumble. The crew hold steady. They do not speak of fear. There is work to do, instruments to monitor, skies to watch. Every minute is borrowed time. Doolittle feels the engine's vibration subtly change. Not a failure, but the strain is growing clearer. He lowers the throttle slightly, trying to conserve every drop of fuel. McCool watches the gauges, measuring distance by instinct and experience now. No celestial navigation, no visual references, only faith that their heading is true. Then, at last, the storm begins to thin. The rain lessens from sheets to scattered flecks, then to mist. The clouds tear open in places, revealing slivers of open sky. Beneath them, a darker shape emerges. Not sea, land, mountainous, jagged, rising upward into the remnants of the storm. China. Relief sweeps through the cabin, quiet and powerful. But it lasts only a moment. The fuel gauges sit near empty. The engines begin to sputter, coughing as if clearing their throats. Doolittle knows they will not make it to a suitable landing field. None of them will. The terrain is unforgiving, a mix of ridges, valleys, and forested slopes. The storm behind them is closing in again. There is no turning back, no circling, no searching. Only one option remains. The crew tightens their harnesses. Loose gear is stowed as best as it can be. Doolittle pulls the aircraft higher, giving his men the altitude they will need. The B-25 shudders as the engines gasp for the last of their fuel. It is time to bail out. The engines cough again, louder this time, a hollow sputter that echoes through the cabin. Doolittle holds the bomber steady, keeping its nose pointed toward the faint outline of mountains ahead. The air inside the aircraft has gone still, except for the steady thump of the propellers, starting to lose rhythm. The crew knows what comes next. No one hesitates, not even for a moment. Doolittle gives the final command. Prepare to bail out. Sergeant Fred Bramer secures his gear, checking the ripcord with trembling fingers. Sergeant Paul Warren braces near the hatch, eyes focused, jaw clenched. Lieutenant Paul Leonard steadies himself beside Doolittle. The wind outside howls through seams in the fuselage as the bomber dips lower. Below them, the rugged terrain of eastern China stretches as far as they can see, a dark blend of ridges, rivers, and forested valleys. There is no place to land. The altimeter needle drops steadily. Doolittle pulls the aircraft to a stable glide, buying his men precious seconds. Each crewman steps toward the hatch in turn. The world becomes a blur of wind and cloud as they leap into open air. Parachutes snap open, white flowers blooming against the storm-washed sky. Doolittle waits until he is certain every man is clear. Then he steps into the rushing wind himself. The B-25, its engines now silent, drifts away like a wounded bird, disappearing into the mist before it smashes into the mountainside below. The air is cold and sharp as it whips past Doolittle's face. His parachute deploys with a jolt that snaps him upward. For a moment, he hangs suspended between cloud and earth, drifting toward a world of dark fields and twisting rivers. The silence feels unreal after hours of engine thunder. He lands hard in a rice paddy, sinking into the mud before struggling to his feet. Pain flashes up his leg, but he forces himself onward, gathering the parachute and listening to distant shouts. Lanterns appear between the terraces. Chinese farmers rush toward him, waving urgently for him to follow. They know who he is. They know what he has done. And they know the danger closing in behind him. Across the region, other crews land in scattered valleys and villages. Some drift into trees, cutting themselves free. Some land in streams or on rocky slopes. Local Chinese civilians risk their lives to hide them. They carry the airmen into huts, barns, sometimes caves. They feed them, bandage them, guide them across miles of rugged territory toward safety. Japanese patrols scour the countryside, enraged by the attack on Tokyo. They burn villages suspected of helping the Americans. They execute civilians who refuse to reveal hiding places. 8 American airmen fall into Japanese hands after their crash landings. Captured, interrogated, held in brutal confinement. Some endure torture. 3 are executed months later. Their sacrifice becomes one of the least known, but most painful chapters of the raid. But most of the raiders survive. Doolittle himself is led through fields and jungles, across ridges and rivers, always moving, always under threat. Exhausted and bruised, he continues until at last he reaches friendly Chinese lines. His first thought is that he has failed. He believes the mission has caused minimal damage and that losing all 16 aircraft will bring reprimand. Instead, when news reaches the United States, the nation erupts in celebration. American newspapers print headlines in bold type. The impossible has been done. Tokyo has been struck. The myth of Japanese invulnerability has shattered. The Japanese high command reels from the psychological blow. Defensive resources are shifted. Strategic plans are altered. The decision to push into Midway, driven partly by the need to extend the defensive perimeter, will soon follow, and will end in catastrophe for Japan. Back at home, President Roosevelt addresses the public, hinting with a wry smile that the bombers came from Shangri-La. Morale soars. Factories increase production. Enlistment surges. The American spirit, wounded since Pearl Harbor, stands taller than it has in months. And for the men who flew the mission, the bond forged that day, on a storm-swept carrier deck, above the burning heart of Tokyo, and in the perilous wilds of eastern China, becomes something unbreakable. 16 bombers launched into the unknown. All reached their target. Not one returned to the Hornet. Yet in their sacrifice, they proved a truth the world had forgotten. America would fight back.